listening to Thom Hartmann.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with 6 minutes past the hour. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann program. And, Mark Taylor-Canfield has some comments for us about the differences between cannabis legality between Washington and Colorado State. I want to hear that. We'll pick that up right after the break. And 20 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Mark Taylor-Canfield on the line, a reporter, indie reporter out of Seattle. Writes for the Huffington Post and other places.
Happy New Year, Tom, to you, your family, and all of your audience.
Well, thank you, and the same to you and yours. And it says here you wanted to talk about the differences in cannabis legality between Washington State and Colorado State. Colorado's getting a lot of publicity. I think everybody's kind of figured out that you can just basically show up and buy a relatively small amount, but you can show up and buy some pot, and you can grow 6 plants and all that kind of thing. How are they doing it in Washington?
Well, I helped moderate a weekly national press briefing, and there were 2 big stories, one of which you covered on your other program, which is the $15 an hour minimum wage being set aside by a Superior Court judge. That's a King County Superior Court Judge, Andrea Darby.
Right, so the people at the SeaTac airport are not getting the wage increase that the citizens of SeaTac voted for them, because this judge says that SeaTac airport is actually not part of the city of SeaTac. It's actually run by the Seattle Port Authority, so it's under the control of Seattle.
Correct, and that's been a big disappointment for a lot of the union organizers and the folks behind.
Well, it ain't over yet, Mark. I mean, this is going to be appealed. This is going to be appealed. So, and then the second is marijuana got decriminalized in what's going on there.
Well, it's a very confusing situation, Tom. It's difficult for journalists to cover the story because we have a very ironic situation where, as of December 6th of last year, the voters approved an initiative to make the recreational use and possession of 1 ounce or less of marijuana legal in Washington State. The difficulty here is that the initiative was so open-ended that it left a lot of the details about the regulation of the distribution, sale, and growing of marijuana unwritten. And as of today, I am still living in a state where it's legal to have an ounce of marijuana, but it's not necessarily legal to sell or distribute it. And unless you're a registered marijuana patient, nor is it necessarily legal to grow it. So it's very confusing for people here. And the problem there is that I believe it was a political decision by the people who ran the initiative to try to keep it as open-ended as possible, with this promise that the details would be worked out later. But all of the regulation for marijuana in Washington State was turned over to the liquor board, the Washington State Liquor Board, which up until last year had no experience or knowledge really of how marijuana is used in the state. So they've literally had to hire former growers and users to help them understand the product. They have to figure out how to market it at a price which will be competitive. They have to figure out how to regulate things like the public use of marijuana, because one of the ideas behind the initiative is let's make marijuana like alcohol, where it's regulated. There are places you can get it. There will be dispensaries in Washington State. But the question was, what do we do about all of these other issues?
So did the initiative give the power to the liquor board to come up with the regulations, and they just haven't gotten to it yet? Is that the deal? Or did it give it to the legislature? The legislature has refused to act.
No, it's actually the state is watching Colorado right now, and I know they've already admitted that there are flights going back and forth between Washington State and Colorado. They're trying to figure out how is Colorado doing it, and how will that work for Washington State. But the initiative did not have any of those details worked out. It was left up to the liquor board to decide how. So
they may well end up just cloning whatever they do in Colorado. That's what we do here. That's the rules. You think?
One of the new ideas is that there is a resolution for a city ordinance that passed through committee for Seattle, which would be a $30 fine for anyone caught smoking in public. So that's one way that they're trying to regulate it. But it's very confusing because people, I think, in Seattle are used to smoking pot outdoors. In fact, the city gave a permit for a huge smoke out. It is going to be difficult to figure out how all of this regulation is going to work. There are DUI laws now, where if you are suspected of being under the influence of marijuana, testing on that is very controversial. So I expect a lot of court challenges on that as well. Yeah, just as a citizen of the state, it's difficult to figure out what the laws actually are, because maybe the city of Seattle might pass a $30 fine, but maybe Spokane will pass a $100 fine. It's just a very confusing situation for a lot of people, especially for medicinal marijuana users, because there was an attempt last year to actually dismantle the entire medicinal marijuana program under this logic that, well, if it's legal, then we don't need to do that. But the problem is that there are already dispensaries in Washington State which have been servicing marijuana.
Well, in Colorado, they're using that dispensary infrastructure to sell to the general public.
Right, and as of today in Washington State, that's not happening. The only way to actually buy marijuana from a dispensary is if you're registered with the state as a marijuana patient. The general public does not have that option yet. They're still trying to work all of these issues out. And I just wanted to let the country know that although, there were the BBC and the CDC and all of Reuters and everyone was here on December 6th to cover this big hot smoke out, the details have not been worked out. And Colorado actually is quite a ways ahead of us right now, Tom. They worked out a lot of this.
They've got this thing nailed down. They've got it nailed down. And the state is going to be making some serious money off it, too. And I think it's going to go like lotteries. You're going to see this thing just spread across the country. We'll see how this works out. So you need to know this. Today, many Americans consider themselves middle class. However, compared to the standards of the 1960s, the so-called middle class is dead. The war on unions is directly responsible. In 1965, Americans willing to take dangerous, difficult work, like a midnight shift shoveling waste at a steel mill, could earn about $2.30 an hour. May not sound like a lot, but it's the equivalent of over $17 an hour today. These jobs are often filled by unskilled workers with high school diplomas or less, but they still paid well enough to cover the cost of an apartment and a car. Today, those same unskilled workers are often forced to work for corporate giants for minimum wage, $7.25 an hour, less than half what they would have been paid in the 1960s. Automation and outsourcing did eliminate many of the manufacturing jobs that previously paid decent wages, but it's a fact that workers have been unable to unionize. It's really kept wages low in the service jobs that replaced manufacturing. In the 1950s, more than 35% of private sector jobs were unionized. Today, fewer than 6% of private sector workers belong to a union, and that number continues to decline. Those labor groups fought for higher wages, workers' rights, and employment regulations, including many of the protections that workers now take for granted. Today, the average employee has virtually no power against their employers, and the corporate masters are fighting hard to keep workers from standing together. That's why today's labor battles are so important. For the rest of the news, a federal judge has rejected the mandatory drug testing of welfare recipients. U.S. District Judge Mary S. Scriven ruled against Florida's drug testing program, writing, "There's nothing inherent to the condition of being impoverished that supports the conclusion that there is a concrete danger that impoverished individuals are prone to drug use. In other words, there's no proof that someone's more likely to use drugs simply because they're poor. These programs have cost taxpayers much more than they promised to save, and they've been used as a way to discriminate." Judge Scriven issued a second ruling against Florida's drug testing program and reinforced a lower court decision that found the program unconstitutional.